There's something stirring beneath the surface of your consciousness, a restless energy that no amount of positive thinking, self-help books, or motivational videos can quiet. You've felt it for months, maybe years, that nagging sense that despite all your efforts to improve, something fundamental remains unchanged. You're still reacting to the same triggers, falling into the same patterns, carrying the same invisible weight. What if I told you that this persistent discomfort isn't a sign of failure, but a signal, a psychological alarm indicating that you're ready for something most people will never dare to face: the complete dismantling of the false self you've built to survive in a world that rewards performance over authenticity. Carl Jung, one of history's most penetrating observers of the human psyche, understood something that modern psychology often overlooks. True transformation doesn't come from adding new positive habits to your life. It comes from removing the psychological poison you've been tolerating for years. You've been living as an accomplice to your own diminishment, accepting behaviors and patterns that slowly erode your essence from within. The first prison most people build for themselves is what Jung called the house of denial, where the shadow rules in secret. His most famous warning echoes through decades of psychological research: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Yet most people live their entire lives as puppets to parts of themselves they refuse to acknowledge. Your shadow isn't your dark side. It's everything you've rejected about yourself to maintain an acceptable image. It includes your anger, your selfishness, your sexual desires, your creative impulses, even your capacity for joy. When you deny these aspects, they don't disappear. They go underground and begin running your life from the shadows. You find yourself inexplicably attracted to toxic relationships, repeatedly sabotaging your own success, or feeling rage over seemingly minor incidents. These aren't character flaws, they're your shadow demanding integration. The person who truly wants to be free must be willing to excavate these buried parts, not to indulge them recklessly, but to understand and integrate them consciously. Think about the last time you had an intense emotional reaction that surprised even you. That sudden burst of anger at a coworker's comment, the inexplicable jealousy when a friend succeeded, the compulsive behavior you couldn't explain even to yourself. These moments are your shadow speaking, trying to tell you something about the parts of yourself you've abandoned in order to be acceptable. The cruel irony is that by trying to be good, nice, and perfect, you've created an internal tyrant far more demanding than any external authority. This inner critic becomes relentless, judging every impulse, every thought, every natural human response as unacceptable. You become split against yourself, exhausted by the constant effort to maintain an image that was never really you. From denial, many people slip into the swamp of resentment, where pain becomes poison. Resentment is perhaps the most insidious of all psychological prisons because it disguises itself as righteousness. You tell yourself you're maintaining boundaries, but you're actually maintaining wounds. You replay conversations, imagine revenge scenarios, and build elaborate cases for why you were wronged. Jung understood that resentment is transformed pain suffering that was never properly processed. Instead of moving through the natural cycle of hurt, grief, and release, you've created a story that keeps the wound alive. You've become addicted to your own victimhood because it provides a sense of identity and moral superiority. The person who wronged you moves on with their life while you remain chained to a moment that exists now only in your mind. The cruel irony is that resentment never punishes the person who hurt you, it only punishes you. It closes your heart, clouds your judgment, and turns you into the very thing you resent: someone who causes pain. You start seeing enemies everywhere, projecting your inner toxicity onto innocent situations, poisoning new relationships with old grievances. But there's something even more devastating than resentment, and that's the prison of guilt and shame, where self-condemnation becomes a life sentence. There's a crucial distinction Jung made that most people miss. Guilt says, I made a mistake, while shame says, I am the mistake. Guilt can be productive. It motivates repair and growth. Shame is pure psychological poison that disconnects you from your own worth. Shame operates in whispers, not screams. It tells you that you're fundamentally flawed, unworthy of love, and need to earn your right to exist through perfect performance. It's the voice that says you must become someone else to be acceptable, even to yourself. People trapped in shame often appear highly functional on the surface. They work hard, achieve success, maintain relationships, but inside they carry a conviction that they're frauds waiting to be exposed. No achievement feels genuine, no love feels deserved, no forgiveness penetrates the wall of self-judgment. You become a prisoner in your own life, constantly trying to prove your worth to an inner judge who can never be satisfied. The exhaustion is profound because you're not just living your life, you're defending your right to exist every single day. This constant self-surveillance leads naturally to another prison, the theater of persona, where performance becomes your entire identity. Jung's concept of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social situations, was never meant to be pathological. We need some degree of social adaptation to function. The problem arises when the mask becomes so convincing that we forget it's a mask. In the theater of persona, authenticity becomes dangerous. You smile when you want to cry, agree when your soul protests, and shape yourself to meet others' expectations. Slowly, your true self, with all its messy humanity, gets pushed into the unconscious. You become a character in someone else's story, reading from a script you didn't write. The cost is devastating emotional numbness, chronic fatigue, and a persistent sense that your life isn't really yours. You've traded your soul for acceptance, and the bargain leaves you feeling empty, even when surrounded by approval. People praise you for being so agreeable, so reliable, so easy to get along with, but inside you're dying because nobody knows who you really are. Worse, you're starting to forget yourself. When the weight of constant performance becomes unbearable, many people retreat into the labyrinth of overthinking, where analysis becomes paralysis. The modern world worships the rational mind, but Jung understood its limitations. When disconnected from intuition, emotion, and the body's wisdom, thinking becomes circular and self-defeating. You analyze your problems endlessly, but never take action. You plan for every contingency, but never begin. Overthinking feels productive because it gives the illusion of control, but it's actually fear wearing the mask of intelligence. It keeps you trapped in your head, disconnected from the present moment where real life happens. You become a prisoner of your own mental activity, lost in endless loops of worry, analysis, and rumination that lead nowhere except deeper into confusion. Jung emphasized that healing and meaning often arise from the non-rational depths of the psyche, through dreams, symbols, and intuitive insights that can't be logicked into existence. The labyrinth of overthinking blocks access to this deeper wisdom, keeping you spinning in mental circles while life passes you by. After repeated betrayals and disappointments, many people eventually retreat into what feels like emotional safety, the desert of isolation where protection becomes prison. You convince yourself you don't need anyone, that relationships are too risky, that independence is strength. But Jung understood that we are wounded in relationship and healed in relationship. The soul doesn't heal in isolation, it withers. What you're really avoiding isn't other people, but the parts of yourself that feel unworthy of being seen and loved. The desert feels safe because there are no expectations, no disappointments, no betrayals. But slowly the isolation becomes unbearable. You realize you're not protecting yourself, you're suffocating yourself. You've built walls so high that even love can't reach you. The final prison Jung warned against is perhaps the most seductive, the graveyard of the past, where yesterday steals tomorrow. Whether through nostalgia, regret, or unprocessed grief, you become a ghost haunting your own memories instead of a person creating your future. Some people live there because the past even if painful, feels more real than an uncertain future. Others because they've never learned to process loss and let go. The past becomes a graveyard where you kneel before old heartbreaks, replaying what was instead of creating what could be. You become so invested in what happened that you miss what's happening. Your energy is trapped in yesterday, while your life demands presence today. Understanding these 7 prisons is only the beginning. The real work, the revolutionary act, is choosing to stop participating in your own diminishment. This isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming real. It requires developing what I call emotional sovereignty, where you become the author of your emotional life rather than its victim. This doesn't mean suppressing feelings, but developing the capacity to feel fully while choosing your responses consciously. You must also master the art of boundaries, learning to say no without guilt, yes without resentment, and goodbye without apology. Your boundaries become expressions of self-respect rather than walls of fear. Most importantly, you must choose presence over performance, stopping the exhausting attempt to be who you think you should be and starting to be who you actually are. Jung didn't promise that awakening would be comfortable. In fact, he warned of the opposite. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. When you begin to dismantle the false structures you've built, you'll experience what mystics call the dark night of the soul. You may lose relationships that were built on your compliance rather than your authenticity. You may feel lost as old identities crumble before new ones emerge. You may face periods of loneliness as you refuse to participate in the collective unconsciousness that keeps most people trapped. This isn't failure, it's labor pains. Something real is being born. The false self that you've maintained through performance denial and adaptation is dying, and from its ashes, your authentic self can finally emerge. This process is terrifying because it means letting go of everything familiar, even if that familiarity was a prison. But on the other side of this psychological death and rebirth lies something extraordinary: true freedom. Not the kind of freedom that comes from having no responsibilities, but the freedom that comes from being whole rather than fractured, authentic rather than artificial, present rather than haunted by the past or paralyzed by the future. The highest level of psychological development Jung described was what he called individuation, becoming whole rather than perfect. At this stage, you no longer need to win arguments, prove your worth, or control how others see you. You've integrated your shadow so you're no longer controlled by unconscious impulses. You've processed your pain so you're no longer poisoned by resentment. You've shed your masks so you're no longer exhausted by performance. This isn't the end of challenges, it's the beginning of freedom. You face life's difficulties from a place of wholeness, rather than woundedness, strength rather than defensiveness, love rather than fear. You become someone who can stand in the storm without losing their center, who can be criticized without crumbling, who can be alone without feeling abandoned. The world doesn't need more people who are successful, popular, or perfect. It needs more people who are awake, authentic, and whole. It needs individuals who have done the deep work of integration and can therefore stand as beacons of what's possible when someone refuses to accept psychological mediocrity. This is your invitation to psychological revolution, not the gentle kind that asks you to think more positively, but the radical kind that demands you face everything you've been avoiding and integrate everything you've been denying. The 7 prisons Jung identified aren't just personal problems. They're collective symptoms of a society that has forgotten what it means to be truly human. By freeing yourself, you become part of the solution to humanity's psychological crisis. Every person who chooses authenticity over performance, presence over compulsion, integration over denial becomes a light in the darkness for others who are still trapped. Your liberation becomes an invitation for others to find their own freedom. The question isn't whether you're ready for this work. Readiness is a luxury you can't afford, while your authentic self remains imprisoned. The question is whether you have the courage to begin knowing that everything familiar may have to be left behind for something real to emerge. Your shadow is waiting. Your authentic self is calling. The door to your psychological prison is unlocked. It always has been. The only question remaining is whether you'll finally walk through it. The revolution begins within. And it begins now, not tomorrow, when you feel more prepared. Not next week, when circumstances are better. Not next year, when you've read more books or taken more courses. Now, in this moment, you can choose to stop tolerating the intolerable, to stop accepting what diminishes you, to stop living as a prisoner in your own life. The path isn't easy, but it's simple. Face what you've been avoiding. Feel what you've been numbing. Speak what you've been silencing. Be who you've been hiding. The world is waiting for the real you to finally show up.